I've had a lot of bad luck in my life when it comes to violent encounters with the wrong sort of people. Though unfortunately, this wasn't the first incident and far from the last. Graduating from a relatively prestigious, still public sort of high school with an emphasis in engineering, I decided without much thought to pursue a degree in engineering in college. In the end, I gained admission to Virginia Tech and headed off to Southwest Virginia in August of 2006. Long story short, it was a big and somewhat difficult adjustment, and it wasn't going quite as well as I would have liked. As an interesting aside, on the very first day of classes, in fact, in my very first college class ever, one of the school staff stuck their heads in the door and told us that classes were canceled for the day and that we should head back to our dorms and stay there because there may have been a shooter on campus. It turns out that there had been an inmate at the local hospital in town and he had killed a security guard in order to escape, and the authorities believed he might head to campus to blend in with the thousands of students. I remember he was caught, but I don't think he was on the campus. I honestly can't remember that part, but it was kind of a weird way to start college. No huge deal though, right? Well, more like a very small dress rehearsal for what was to come later. Anyways, fast forward to 8 months later, mid-April, I woke up Monday in my dorm room in Cochrane Hall at about 7:30 if memory serves. Looking out my window to the northeast, I could see across the courtyard to West Ambler Johnston, and down in the courtyard below was an ambulance. Now you have to understand, Virginia Tech is a huge school. When I went there in 2006 to 2007, there were something like 26,000 students in attendance. Because the school is located in a rural area, they provided basic medical services and EMS on campus. With this many kids running around getting drunk, forgetting to take meds, taking too many meds, having epilepsy, diabetic attacks, etc., it wasn't super uncommon to see an ambulance on campus, so I didn't think much of it. I did check my campus email to make sure everything was okay, and in the absence of any warnings about anything, I pulled some clothes and shoes on and shuffled over to D2, a huge buffet-style dining hall. Love their app refrigerators, by the way, and a $1.70 breakfast, to get some chow before my French class at 9 o'clock. Having accomplished this, I proceeded across campus to Holden Hall, which is basically the east wing of a bigger building. The west wing of the building is called Norris Hall. French class started, and I think we were talking about Sarkozy and the upcoming French elections when we started hearing the weird sounds of the PA system outside. The week before had included some minor disruptions to our schedule in the form of prank bomb scares, and we figured some idiot was at it again. No big deal. Boy, were we wrong. About 5 minutes later, we see some cop cars pull up outside, and about a minute after that, we see more cop cars pull up along with a big van, and out of the van come several men dressed in full black body armor with what looks like M16s, so maybe not a bomb scare anymore. At this point, our instructor was having some trouble keeping us focused on our lesson anymore and sort of followed us to watch what was going on, and somebody said we should turn on the TV and see if there was any information on the news. The information wasn't totally clear from the TV, but it seemed that somebody had shot 8 people on campus, and I remember us talking and saying that there was no way that it was that many people. At this point, I decided I should call my mom. I whipped out my phone, not caring that we were still in class, and dialed her up at work. Thankfully, she answered. "Hey mom, are you watching the news right now?" "No, I'm at work." "I know. You should probably turn it on, but I wanted to let you know I'm okay before the phone stopped working." I recalled from after 9/11 that everyone and their mother was trying to call loved ones that day, so the cell grid was basically overloaded and most calls wouldn't go through, and I assumed the same thing was about to happen here, even if nothing had actually happened. The grid did go down later though. I said goodbye and also called my friend Allie to make sure she was okay, especially since she lived in the same building that I'd seen the ambulance at earlier. She was fine, and I went back to watching the news. It came to light at this point that there had apparently been more than one shooting incident at the school, at Allie's building, West AJ, and now at Norris Hall, which we'd already figured out on our own. Looking out the window at the ever-growing sea of cop cars below us, on Drill Field Drive and on the field itself, we suddenly hear outside the windows from the other end of the building. Crack, crack, crack. We all looked at each other, and suddenly this was way more serious. This was very real. People were being shot at inside of our building. At this point, we decided that maybe we should be a little bit more proactive about our safety. We turn the lights off, turn the TV off, and start rearranging the furniture in the room to block the door. Though admittedly the makeshift barricade probably wouldn't have stopped a really determined person from getting inside, since the door had frosted glass on its upper half instead of being solid. We figured that this is better than nothing though, and sit down on the floor near the front of the room, talking to each other in hushed tones. About 15 minutes goes by and we hear footsteps outside the room. Everybody freezes and no one makes a sound. I remember looking up from the floor towards the door, wondering if this was it. Is this how I die? A few seconds later, we hear a tap on the door in a deep voice. This is Deputy so-and-so of the thus and such Sheriff's Department. Stay where you are and leave your lights off and stay quiet. We'll be back for you as soon as we can. This was not a member of either the campus police or the Blacksburg police. But from looking out the window, we already knew that there were cops there from everywhere within driving distance. We all looked around at each other in solemn silence. We'd all just been thinking the same thing before the deputy had spoken. Thankfully, he hadn't asked us to open the door because I don't think anyone would have gotten up from where they were sitting. We stayed down and quiet for a couple more hours. I can't really remember what it was we talked about while I was there since we were all so keyed up. It's been a long time waiting. Then we hear footsteps again outside the door. This time we saw evidence of who the man was before he spoke. A gold badge, pressed up against the frosted glass, assured us that what we heard was legitimate. This is Deputy so-and-so again. It's time to go. We all quietly got up and grabbed our backpacks. A couple of guys in the class, myself included, started pulling the tables away from the door as quickly and quietly as we could, and then we cracked the door. I think on some level all of us expected that this was a trick, but when we opened the door, standing a few feet away was the sheriff's deputy in uniform with his sidearm drawn and held at his side. He held his finger up to his lips, indicating we should be quiet, and he dropped his voice to a whisper. You're going to walk downstairs as quietly as you can. There are 2 more cops by the door outside, and they know you're coming. Just walk straight outside and don't stop. He nodded at us, and we started making our way downstairs. He got on his radio and signaled. Students coming out. When we got to the midway landing, we could see the front door cracked and a cop peering in. Walking up to the door, he opened it wider to let us pass, and as he did, he looked straight at us and said quietly but very seriously, after signaling on his radio, "Run." Walking out that door in the morning light, I was greeted by a sight I'll never forget. I have never seen so many cop cars in one place in my entire life, and honestly hope I never have to again. There were easily 200 or 300 Crown Vics and a smattering of additional vans, trucks, and commanded center vehicles crowding every inch of space, starting about 100 feet from that door. In front of those vehicles stood a phalanx of at least 40 officers armed with M16s and even a couple of MP5s directly in our path. As soon as we were outside, the several cops to the left and right of this formation waved at us in an unmistakable gesture of, "Move your ass." We ran off to the left of the cops with the big guns, over Drillfield Drive, and onto the drill field itself. And we didn't stop until we were almost to the other side. I read the news online after I got to my dorm. MSNBC had something at the bottom of an article that said something like, "If you have any information about this, please contact us at insert email here." Thinking little of it, I emailed them with my contact info, and within 10 minutes, my phone absolutely blew up. I was beset with interview requests and questions from at least 20 different people, and actually arranged to meet with their crews down at the inn, the on-campus hotel, that evening. I ended up doing 2 national interviews, one on Scarborough Country and another with Geraldo Rivera, who was kind of self-absorbed but was cool enough to order us pizza and sit with us while we ate before the interview. Second with my 2 friends, who had agreed to accompany me down to the circus that the inn had become. I did a few more for local radio stations and some print news before deciding that I'd had quite enough for the day and went to my dorm to get some sleep. I hadn't really been sold on the whole college experience up until that point, but strangely enough, if anything, the whole experience seemed to bring me and my friends closer together for that last month at school. Check this guy out, an engineering professor who survived the Holocaust and, in his final act, held the door of his classroom shut to give his students time to escape. He died at this scene but was really a hero, and one guy I didn't know from my art history class was killed. The rest of the tragedy is part of the public record. I'm sad to say that I left Virginia Tech after that year, for completely unrelated reasons, and always missed it, but I still talk to my friends from that first year, and I miss both the place and their company. Virginia Tech seemed to have had a horrible patch of bad luck starting in 2006 and lasting for a few years, also including a really gruesome beheading in a dining hall, an accidental death, and a few other crazy things. And a close call with carbon monoxide poisoning for the entire cheerleading team at the inn, all in the year following the big shooting. They also had a couple who were attending the school abducted and murdered a few years ago. But IIRC, it happened farther north in the state, I think near Charlottesville. Luckily, I never experienced any of that. I think I'd fulfilled my quota of random bad luck, at least for a while. It's 3 a.m. I can't sleep and I have graduation practice today, so I might as well tell this story since I have to see him later anyway. I have never posted to the sub, but I need to rant about this. For those of you who are confused why the title is like this, I have a small Reddit series about all the neckbeards and weebs I find at cons, and the reason I'm actually posting on this sub is because the dude I'm dealing with is neither a weeb nor a neckbeard. I'm not even sure if this belongs here, so let me know if you think there's a better place for it. This entire mess started 13 years ago, when I moved to my neighborhood around the age of 5. I was shy and awkward, but as all 5-year-olds do, I wanted to make some semblance of friends, so I tried to talk to my neighbor, Fish, who at the time was also around the age of 5. I didn't realize this was a mistake. Granted, things were normal at first. Fish was kind, albeit somewhat creepy, but at that young of an age, you're easily forgiven for that. And adults don't really see you as creepy either. Fish and I took the same school bus, hung out at lunch, all of that. Now, as most young friendships do, Fish and I started to have distance between us. I didn't make an active effort to talk to him anymore because I had new friends. Plus, at the time, he was getting really strange. I guess that's the best word for it. He started doing reports on only fish sex for some reason. Hence the nickname Fish, and didn't speak to anyone anymore, just kind of stared at me. Whenever I had a friend over, he would stare at us from his window and come up to my friend the next day and say he saw us in the yard. If I were in the yard, he'd brag about seeing me to another friend. If my brother were in the yard, he'd ask him to grab me. I mostly just ignored this because I was annoyed by it since the pattern of behavior started at the age of 9, and my parents wrote it off as him having a crush on me, and I just didn't care. Everybody at school eventually came to know him as creepy. He would always try to touch girls, especially me, in inappropriate ways. He would always stare and, of course, tell our friends where we were, later like it was an accomplishment. This was the beginning of his obsession with me. But at the end of the day, I think he developed this because I used to be nice to him. Plus, I'm across the street from him. Now, this is personal but important. I have attendance issues when it comes to school. Like most kids, I was bullied, and there was some other personal stuff that I'm not going to delve into right now. And eventually, I did end up being pulled out of school at around the age of 13 to work on my own issues. Fish didn't take well to that. He sat with my best friend every day and asked where I was, why I wasn't going outside as often, and why I wasn't at school. And bless her soul for not spilling all my secrets to him, but instead of moving away from him. I was too far deep in my own issues to worry about him, and honestly, I forgot he existed for a while. He started getting more precise in his reports of seeing me, though. He would still go to my friends, and this time he gave exact times and dates. He would ask where I was, say that he hadn't seen me around in this many days, and that he missed me. Red flags everywhere, I know, but we were still children. Like 13 or 14 at the time, and there wasn't anything we could do about it. When we turned 15, he decided to become more proactive. He stopped talking to my best friend and instead focused his energy on watching me and my brother, who had just started attending the high school. Now, I've never seen this journal, but allegedly, he had been documenting everything he could see me do. And since he watched my yard, he saw me with my first boyfriend. He got mad and stormed over and accused me of cheating. I haven't even spoken to him in years, and I had no idea how to react. He said that he loved me, so I said I was going to call the police if he didn't get off my family's property. He said that he would never give up, and he left. Everything about that just seemed wrong, and that was when I truly started becoming scared instead of annoyed. During my 15th year on Earth, I discovered my sexuality with actually the help of my boyfriend who predicted it. We're still good friends till this day, and I tried to be more open again, like I was when I was younger. I was going to a therapeutic day school instead of my public high school. I was still struggling, but I worked hard to be a better person. I also changed my name, although it wasn't much of a change as it was just making it official, since everyone called me that nickname anyway. I guess he heard about the fact that I'd come out as lesbian and took it as a personal insult. He started changing everything about himself, and he had pretty much attempted to become my perfect boyfriend. And now he turned into anti-me. These are just some examples, so don't get butthurt, please. Obviously, I respect all opinions, and I'm not attacking yours, just stating my experience. I was for repealing the Second Amendment, he was against it. I was obviously for gay marriage, and he was against that too. I'm agnostic, not religious at all. At the age of 16, he found our Lord and Savior Jesus and became the school equivalent to a preacher kind of. And of course, I really like anime, and he really hates anime. Not for the last opinion. I'm not saying this lightly. I like anime a lot actually, as the title suggests. I work as a professional part-time cosplay model. I travel around the country and make my living working with photographers and cons alike. Of course, it all doesn't involve anime, but anime is the main nerdy thing I am into, besides video games, and I really enjoy what I do. I started working as a model when I was only 16, and he started hating anime with a passion around that time too. He finally started to become violent around that time. Anything involving Japan in some way, he would attack. He actually stopped talking to the Asian students at our school because they were too similar to Japanese students, he said, which is obviously extremely racist. He would go on and on about how anime is the creation of the devil and that everyone should be ashamed that watches it. He even beat up a kid for wearing a My Neighbor Totoro jacket. He never said any of this to me directly. He more or less just spoke to someone else near me because he was too scared to talk to me. I still didn't even attend his school, and this man hates me with a passion. I and the rest of the world try our best to ignore him. So I'm 17 now. Prom came up a month or two ago. Despite going to therapy school, my school allows me to attend all their events as if I were a student. He decided it would be a good idea to try and talk to me. He calls me by my old name, which is really disrespectful because he's been corrected on it a lot and I don't know what to do beyond saying hi. I think the reason he calls me by my old name is because he has this preconceived idea of me in his head and this new me is terrible or something. I was in a crowded area, but have you ever been looked at so intensely it's like the room fades away? There was just something broken in his eyes as he looked at me. Something that really scared me. He asked me once again why I hadn't been outside lately. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Does it matter?" He sounded flat as he said, "I haven't seen you in your front or backyard or your basement. Where have you been?" His house faces my front yard. The only way he could see into my basement, which has glass windows in the very back, and my backyard is if he actually went outside and waited for me in the bushes or trees of my yard. I didn't have a chance to respond back because my best friend has spidey senses and her gut told her I wasn't feeling so good, so she zoomed over, whisking me away. He was still staring at me the entire time we were leaving. I went into the bathroom after that and cried. It wasn't like anyone could help me either. I don't have proofies in my yard. But after that, I started receiving hang-up calls. I'm still getting those. His car has often blocked me off in traffic. I feel like my own fears aren't even justified because he hasn't technically done anything, but at the same time, I'm freaked. So Fish, even though we're about to meet once again at this graduation thing, I hope I never speak to you again. This happened in January or February of 2002. I, female, had just turned 21 and was living with my father in Ohio. For context, I was extremely naive and living a pretty directionless life. I'd grown up in an affluent area of Seattle, gone to private school and gone on to college, and dropped out. I was dealing with some kind of depression, partying a lot, hanging out with the wrong crowd, hooking up with random strangers. My mom didn't know what to do with me, so she sent me to live with my dad across the country in Columbus. Now, I'd been living in Ohio with my dad and pretty much lived like an entitled teenager. I did have a job in retail, but other than that, I sat around and didn't do much. My dad is an alcoholic and didn't help much. At some point, seeing him passed out in the living room one morning and working a dead-end job kind of got me wanting to return home to Seattle. My mom was unwilling to let me live with her again. I called my best friend at the time. Her mom was like my family. They didn't have a lot of money, but bought me a bus and a train ticket back home. They said I could stay with them until I got back on my feet. I was relieved. My dad was sad to see me go, but he agreed to drop me off at the bus station downtown. The thing is, he had to take me before his work shift. My bus didn't leave until later in the afternoon, so I'd basically have to wait from 9 a.m. until we boarded. My dad was very nervous about leaving me there. He warned me that the station was in a rough part of Columbus, and that I needed to be careful. So he drove me to the Greyhound station. It was surrounded by people waiting for their buses, a few stragglers outside the entrance. It was cold outside that day. Inside the bus terminal, it was pretty empty. Dad helped bring my luggage inside, 2 large suitcases containing all of my possessions. If I didn't want to be dragging them around with me all day, I had to pay to store them in a locker by the desk. I can't remember exactly how much, but I was broke and couldn't spare money for that. I looked warily at the clock. My dad looked at me with sadness. I could tell he was a bit worried about me traveling by myself. I hugged him and tried to look as confident as possible. We said our goodbyes and he left. I have traveled numerous times, made several trips by plane by myself, and have traveled to various countries with groups. I was not adverse to adventure. What I was not good at doing was reading people. I genuinely saw the good in everybody and had never had a negative experience, even at 4 a.m. in downtown Seattle. If you know anything about Seattle, it has a robust public transportation system, and I was no stranger to weirdos, drunk people, and hostile exchanges between people on the bus. I'd usually just ignore people or continue walking. In this situation, I felt I was totally in my element as I'd taken public transportation many times alone. Back to the Greyhound station, I decided to go outside and have a cigarette. The conundrum was that I had to keep an eye on my 2 suitcases. I positioned them near the front desk in such a way that I could see them clearly from the front entrance. I then head outside to get my nicotine fix. I stand off to the right of the front door. I'm smoking and trying to shuffle through my extremely cheap and very ugly purse, which contained my passport because, duh, I was totally irresponsible and lost my driver's license. As I'm shuffling around, a man with a large knitted hat asked me for a cigarette. I glance at him. Sure. I hand him one and a light. We chat briefly and I study his face. He's not unattractive, not scary looking. Maybe a little disheveled, but I couldn't tell if he was homeless. No immediate red flags. I felt safe as the outside of the terminal was littered with people, some smoking like me, others walking briskly to their destinations. Notably, an older gentleman is standing opposite me, on the left side of the entrance. As I'm talking to the man in the hat, this older gentleman seems to be staring at me intently. You'll understand why soon. The man in the hat asks me where I'm from, if I'm catching a bus, and comments on the cold. In passing, I casually lament that I am running low on smokes. He looks at me and says, "Oh, there's a gas station just around the corner. You can get some from there." I think this through for a moment. My bus wouldn't come for hours. I could easily grab a pack and be back in time. Something stops me, however, as I remember my luggage sitting unattended. I said I'll think about it and turned back inside. Hours passed, and every once in a while, I would go back outside to smoke. The man in the hat seems to be there every time. At one point, he mentions the gas station again. "It's just right there. I can take you." Again, I decline, and it's not because I'm scared, it's because I'm worried about my luggage. I go back inside. The last time I went outside, the street was eerily quiet. Nobody there. I grab another cigarette and place my purse on the ground by my feet. I look up. The man in the hat is there. He asks for money. This is where my gut finally turns and I feel uneasy. I say I don't have much and I can't help it. I hurriedly finish my cigarette as I'm suddenly very aware that my purse is lying next to my feet exposed. I lean over quickly to pick it up and mumble something about going back inside. As I raise up my hand, a man in a hat reaches out and grabs my purse and says, "Let me help you with that." My body seems to drain itself and I immediately grab my purse closer to me. "I'm good," I say. The man in the hat suddenly switches from a harmless random dude into a nasty thief. "Give me the purse," he hisses. He says it through clenched teeth, like he's trying to be quiet. I'm struggling against him now. Desperate as I realize no one is here to help me, I start screaming, "Help!" The man in the hat is shoving me with his hip now and pushes me against the wall. He tells me to shut up. I'm super desperate now. This guy could easily pull out a knife and shank me or punch me. I cling to my purse and hope that the cheap handles hold together. His hands are on mine and he shoves me again, calling me all kinds of names. I scream more. From the left, I suddenly hear, "Are you okay?" Remember the older gentleman from earlier? He seemingly steps out of nowhere and loudly asks me what was going on. I shoved the man in the hat hard with my left thigh, and I think he realized at that moment that if he did anything to me, he could be identified. He lets go of my purse and runs off. I'm shaking and run tearfully inside, leaving the older gentleman outside. I was too frightened to say thank you. I spent the rest of that day hovering by the front desk. I was terrified. I thought of the 3-day trip ahead of me and shook with dread. I held my purse in my hands with a vice grip. When my time finally came to board the bus to the train station, I glanced in terror over the other passengers. No way I was sitting next to anyone. Every person became a potential criminal. I slumped into a seat and cowered by the window, then heard a voice behind me. "I was going to warn you," said the voice. I whipped my head around. There was the older gentleman, casually sitting behind me. My eyes were probably as large as dinner plates. I knew he was targeting you. You need to be more careful. I tearfully thanked him. He just stared out of the window and nodded. We didn't speak again. That moment changed my life. My struggle with the man in the hat must have only taken 30 seconds, but the repercussions lasted even 20 years later. I think back to how adamant the man in the hat was about me going around the corner to the gas station. My hair still stands on end when I think about it. Would he have robbed me over the few measly dollars in my purse? Murdered me? Worse? Who knows? It chills my blood to think about that. I spent the next 3 days paranoid and unwilling to leave my luggage unattended. Clung to my purse and used it as a pillow on the train when lying down. When I used the restroom, I rolled my luggage into the tiny bathroom with me. I didn't sleep, didn't eat. In chilling contrast, the train trip was quiet and uneventful. Staring out the window as we entered Washington State, the snowfall and evergreen trees weighed down by the heavy snow. I was no longer the naive and reckless young woman at the Greyhound station. I was a changed person. This happened a long time ago when I was younger, and I have a really bad memory. This is just me recounting memory to the best of my ability and what I was told. I also want to preface this story by saying that this story takes place somewhere in Indonesia, where it's more commonplace to have maids in your household. When I was younger, I had a strong relationship with my extended family. To me, it was normal to be close with your extended family, and when I say extended, I don't even know how they're related to me. In particular, I was close with my grandaunt's family, calling her Grandaunt Sheila, whose daughters or in-laws were like my big sisters. Being the eldest child, I liked being babied by them since I was always expected to be the big sister for my little brother. This is important for later. I was maybe 11 years old or younger. Neither my parents nor I could remember exactly when it happened. I just want to say, as a kid, I loved milk. I still do, though I tend to stick with skim milk now. When I was younger, I had a favorite local brand that had the usual strawberry flavor. The brand was called Ultra Milk. It was always cool that I was drinking something pink. Unbeknownst to my parents, a gift basket had shown up at our doorstep, and the maids had taken the gift, thinking it was a present from one of my mother's friends. My parents had even seen the gift basket and didn't think much of it. It was full of fruit, sweets, etc. The usual kind you would send to someone maybe on a special occasion. It should have been weird that there wasn't a special occasion, but another weird part was that usually gift baskets had a card or something to indicate where they had come from, but there was no indication of who it had come from at all. But the maids had overlooked it and my parents didn't notice at the time. They had assumed the head maid had checked it through. She didn't. In the gift basket, there was my favorite tiny carton of my favorite milk, even strawberry flavored. I had lessons with a tutor, and oftentimes the maid accompanying me to the lesson would bring me snacks of food since the tutoring would take a few hours. I was at my tutor's house and she was teaching me about the homework I got today when I got thirsty, and I got my carton of milk to take a sip. I was ready to take a drink of the extremely sweet, artificially flavored strawberry milky goodness, but something was wrong. It didn't taste right. I don't remember what it tasted like, but I just knew it was wrong. I remember describing to my parents that it felt like I licked the bottom of a metal frame chair I had in my room at my desk. It just tasted awful. Thinking that maybe it was spoiled, my mom had warned me about drinking spoiled milk and how it can really upset your stomach. I immediately, without swallowing, grabbed some tissues at the table and spat out the mouthful into the tissue, and was surprised to see sort of weird metallic beads in it. Like metal, but it was liquid. I had never seen anything like it and I was confused. My tutor was even more confused and horrified that I just spat out a strange metallic substance from my mouth. I didn't really understand what was going on, but my tutor asked to take the carton of milk where I had tried to drink from and told me to just continue working while she went to investigate. Apparently my tutor and her head maid went outside and poured a bit more of the milk into a tissue, and there was more of this weird metal liquid in there. She asked me if I had drunk any of it, and I told her that maybe. I took maybe a sip and swallowed before I realized that something bad was in there. After that, my tutor apparently called my mom and told her that I had been possibly poisoned. I went home without finishing my lesson, becoming slightly concerned that maybe something was wrong. I went home and I don't really remember what happened after that. There wasn't a poison center in my country and no emergency services that would really respond. Third world country and all of that, so my parents took me to a doctor to have blood tests. I remember being pulled out of school. My mom wanted me to stay home from school for the next few days, which was great for me. No one told me the severity of the situation though, and my mom just told me that she wanted me to chill at home for a while. No school, and I get to have fun? No way, so I did. I stayed home and watched Avatar, The Last Airbender on DVD, while my parents were fretting over the idea that I might have been poisoned by mercury. The gift basket had been taken apart and stored to eat for later. It was all reassembled, and my parents tried to go with this to the police, but they really couldn't do anything, since we literally had no leads on where this gift basket came from, since it had no card, and the police really couldn't care less about our situation, to be honest. I don't really know what happened other than I was pretty cool staying home and playing. My life at home wasn't perfect though. I got some issues with my parents, but they were really nice to me during this time, so I enjoyed it a lot since I didn't really understand. I think my parents kept a lot of things from me to keep me from getting scared. My parents even took me overseas to Singapore, even taking the liquid found in the carton with them in a tin or whatever to show the doctors there, where I got tested some more and didn't seem to have any signs of poisoning. I didn't swallow enough of it. I'm not sure if it really was mercury, no one has ever told me, but at the end of the day, everyone was glad that I didn't drink enough of it to get affected by whatever it was. Now to get in the suspect part. My parents later told me that they had a sneaking suspicion that it was possible that Grandaunt Sheila was the one who tried to poison me. I didn't know this at the time, but around the time of the incident, Grandaunt Sheila was found to have stolen gold and jewelry from my parents' store for years, worth thousands of dollars. My parents were furious and wanted to report her to the authorities, but my grandma, her sister, loved her too much and instead just cut contact with her. Since then, Grandaunt Sheila has seemed to want to enact vengeance over being caught and has been trying to get back at us. My mom warned me that I couldn't play with the big sisters, Grandaunt Sheila's daughters, anymore since they did something very bad, and to never get into a car with them if they showed up at my school, but it didn't click into my mind until now. Thinking back, Grandaunt Sheila was close enough to me to know that I loved drinking milk and maybe tried to hurt my family, even if it meant hurting her grandniece. Not sure what I would be to her. We could never confirm it was her, but Grandaunt Sheila has continued to be a thorn in my family's side for years now. Though my parents have learned a lesson and ensured that whenever we received a gift basket, there had to be a name on it. My grandmother doesn't believe her sister did it though, but my parents firmly believe that she was responsible. But we have no proof other than her horrible character. We've received weird gifts like black seeds and hair that was supposedly some sort of witchcraft thing. Witchcraft and sorcery are popular things in Indonesia, believe it or not. We assume that this was all from Grandaunt Sheila, who still lived in the same city as us. It only made sense. My parents never bought me the Ultra Milk brand again, which I was okay with since that moment spoiled the Ultra Milk brand to me forever. I was reminded of this story while drinking strawberry milk the other day, a different brand. I'm no longer living in Indonesia, not in the same country as Grandaunt Sheila. I lived and worked in Saudi Arabia for a few years back in the mid-90s. I had some crazy experiences there, but this was one of the most frightening. I was in a supermarket buying groceries and this man started following me around. I ignored him as he tried to talk to me and kept calling me sweet baby and asking me if I was Lebanese. But there was something menacing about how he was looking at me. Then he got on his phone and was talking very intently, all the while watching me and following me around. This was a big Walmart-sized store, so he was definitely making an effort, and this went on for like 20 minutes. I was very nervous at this point and checked out with my items and started to leave. Just outside the door and into the corridor of smaller stores, very common in Saudi supermarkets, there was a group of between 10 and 15 angry-seeming men who all crowded around me and started talking to me in Arabic. I played dumb and just kept my eyes down and kept mumbling about my husband, hoping they would think I was not a lone woman and let me go. People were walking past and working hard to not look at this threatening group surrounding a woman. Just then, my amazing driver, a tiny little guy about 5'2", bowled through the group and grabbed my arm and started yelling at me angrily and then at the men. He was yelling, "Wife, I've been waiting. Ugh, you're so slow and stupid, and what are you doing? Sinful creeps," and threatening to call the Mudawa, which is the religious police. The men fell back and looked ashamed and confused, and Abdul dragged me out of there, talking loudly about how stupid and useless I was. I just went with him and kept my head down as I tried to not drop my groceries from nerves. He got in the car and he turned around from the driver's seat to look at me and let out a big breath. He looked terrified. He said he was so frightened for me. He had seen many men gathering in the car park and knew something bad was going down. He said they had been talking about taking me. They thought I was Lebanese and there was very bad blood with Lebanon at the time. I'm ethnically Romani. I pass as white in Western countries, but pass for Middle Eastern in the East. Apparently, I have a Lebanese nose, LOL. He told me there had been some kidnappings in the last month, with the victims found burned alive in tires, outside of the city. Abdul was a shit shooter, but he had gone whiter than me as he told me all of this and was genuinely shaking and afraid, so I don't think he was exaggerating. After that, whenever I was sent out on errands, he always came in with me and pretended to be my husband, which was a huge risk to us both. If the Mutawal caught us, they would have imprisoned us, and he would have gotten it way worse than me too. He was an amazing person to stick his neck out like that for a jerk like me. In 2013, I was 21 years old and studying abroad in South America with my college roommate. I had more than one unsettling encounter while down there, but I'm an experienced traveler and generally have good instincts, so I can't say I have any other thrilling stories aside from narrowly dodging a few muggings. Other than the general sense of unease that can come with being a solo female traveler, well, pair of solo female travelers, our 4-month stay was relatively unexciting. Relatively. At the end of our program, we decided to stay for some extra time and do some more casual backpacking. We ended up deciding to the Inca Trail. Amazing for anyone considering it. For the unfamiliar, you start in one location, which varies depending on the trek you choose, and then you end in a small town near Machu Picchu, called Aguas Calientes. Your return trip is covered by your hiking company unless you choose to stay, in which case you get a refund. Well, we were in a new town and our company left immediately after lunch, and we wanted to spend the night and get the most out of being in that part of the country. The time came and we said farewell to 11 of our 12 hiking companions and were joined by one other of our new friends who was planning on starting an additional hike in the morning. Our guides gave us our refund and gave us very careful instructions on how to get back to Cuzco, the city we had originally departed from. Once you are ready to leave, make your way to the train station right there. Don't go anywhere else, it's a very official and safe train. Once you get to the last stop, go to the official bus station and it will bring you back to Cuzco. We understood, thanked them, and parted ways. That night we went out drinking with the remaining member of our hiking party. He didn't drink because of his grueling hike the next day, but we had a blast and felt safer for having a male with us. Overall, we had made sure to keep our wits about us, and it turns out to be a very fun night without incident. We make our way back to the hostel, wish him well on his travels, and go to bed, ready to explore the town the next day before catching the train home. We have our fun, then make our way to the train station. It's a very nice train, not unlike the ones I take in the US. Occasionally, maybe even nicer. It definitely felt very safe. The train pulls into the final station and we begin trying to locate the bus station. We ask a gentleman who clearly works at the stop, and he points and tells us to walk about a half mile in that direction and we wouldn't be able to miss it. We thank him and continue. I want to pause here to emphasize all of these conversations and the ones that follow are entirely in Spanish. It's not too important, but it's good for you to understand that I was speaking a language I was extremely proficient in, but not fluent. It's not too difficult for native speakers to talk quickly and avoid being understood. We walked for what actually does not seem like enough time, less than a half mile for sure, before coming across the bus station. I'm shocked to say the least, but I'm also reminding myself that I come from a much nicer part of the world and I need to put aside my preconceived notions. It has a sign clearly labeling it the bus station and it says to Cuzco right on the sign. To be clear, it's not a fake sign. It's similar to a sign marking a gas station from a freeway. A big thick pole, and the actual sign was probably 50 feet in the air. It cannot have been a temporary trick, otherwise I would have been much more suspicious. Aside from that sign though, well, it was something alright. The buses were all the classic bad news white vans. You know the ones. Again, I checked myself. How many people could possibly travel to Cuzco in a day here? It wouldn't make sense to have a giant 20-plus seater bus doing the trek every day. There's a tiny wooden building, presumably an office, underneath the big sign, but we didn't need to go in there as there are two gentlemen standing outside near the vans. We asked them if these are the bushes to Cuzco, though we can clearly read on the sign that they are, and the men confirm. We ask how much the tickets cost and when they plan on departing. They give us the price and say 5 to 10 minutes and then direct us to a van to sit and wait in. We both sit down and I'll admit it, I'm uneasy. Again, I'm an experienced traveler and I do know not to expect modern luxuries in the less developed parts of the world, and there's nothing outwardly sinister about this bus stop, but it just wasn't what I was expecting, even for the area. My roommate does not seem to be sharing any of my trepidation, however. She's a bit more sheltered and generally trusting, so that's fairly in character for her. I'm also an over-worrier, so between us, we are probably both on the more extreme side of the appropriate emotion. Me silently freaking out and her a little too relaxed. We waited for over 10 minutes in this van and we left the door open due to the heat. You're just talking and swatting flies, which are buzzing in and out of the open door. I'm unsurprised we're not on schedule, and I know they are trying to avoid wasting a tank of gas on 2 passengers or are trying to wait for more people, but we have an hour's drive ahead of us and I want to get going. So I decide to go ask. They tell us 5 more minutes. More time passes, and I can't shake the feeling we weren't at the right bus station. Though nobody made mention of there being more than one in a tiny town, so I kept telling myself I was being irrational. I decided to go see if anybody is in the office and just get more information. I open the door and walk in without much hesitation. Given its positioning under the giant sign, well, I walk into what is clearly a residence and like 15 sweaty Peruvians cooking beans and looking as shocked to see me as I am to see them. I stammer out, is this the bus station? They look confused and then go, oh, the bus? Yes, the bus. Go outside. Talk to the men. Bus to Cusco. I back out and apologize for intruding. I go back to the van to report the experience to my roommate, right as another girl walks up and says, bus to Cusco? She is clearly a native Spanish speaker and not a foreign tourist. The men immediately say yes and place her in a different van, which makes no sense if they are trying to fill one van to take us to the same place. This skeeves me out more than anything else that's happened yet. I pop my head in the van and tell my roommate to keep hanging tight. I walk over to the girl in the other van where she is also waiting alone and ask her if she's going to Cusco. She confirms this to be the case, and I explain we are going there as well, and I'm not sure why we would be in separate vans. She says she doesn't know but looks genuinely unconcerned. I go back to our van and sit down, which my roommate has not left, and we've been there for probably 30 minutes at this point. I start expressing my concerns to her, but she's being somewhat dismissive, which I can't blame her for, as I'm a genuinely anxious person and she's more used to that than anyone. We get pretty quiet and resign ourselves to waiting, still swatting flies and dabbing our brows with our shirts. I'm now sitting quietly with my mind going wild with possibilities and extremely suspicious something is wrong, but also conceding that there's nothing too concrete, justifying my level of concern. At this point, I'm not picturing some ploy to abduct foreigners or being generally murdered. It's not a great feeling. Flies are driving me absolutely mad at this point, and now I've decided they are probably hovering around the car because somebody was murdered in there and the blood wasn't cleaned well enough to fool the flies. At this point, I'm just torturing myself. The train of thought continues and I look up. Hundreds of flies are swarmed and crawling on the roof of the van. I realize we hadn't noticed because only a few would be flying around at a time, and the van was rather spacious, and my roommate and I were closer to the front while the mass grouping of them was closer to the back. I'm frozen in fear at this point, unsure if this is confirming my theory that somebody was murdered in the car or if I'm really letting my imagination run wild and there are less remarkable things than flies in a South American van. I'm basically hyperventilating. I wish I could emphasize how many flies were in there. I gesture upwards towards my roommate, who looks up and then appears shocked. At this point, I can assume I'm shaking my head and muttering. Right as this happens, the other van with the naive girl begins to pull away. I make a snap-second decision. I launch myself out of our van and start sprinting and slam my head on her van to bring it to a stop. She opens the door in shock, and I grab the door to hold it open, say more forcefully than I thought I had to be. We are coming for you. I look back at my roommate, who is just staring, and I yell, grab our bags and run, now. She knew better than to mess with me when I'm in crisis mode and come sprinting out of the other van with both backpacks in hand while I keep my hand on the door. The 2 men come running after her, saying, don't go, we leave now, we leave for Cusco now. As I shove my friend into the car and scream, sorry, we are riding with our friend here, and slam the door closed. The native girl, looking unsettled, just tells the driver we are friends and to drive. At this point, I don't know that this driver isn't on whatever I was afraid of, or if he was but they didn't plan on messing with a loco. Either way, I just saw her as our best bet. We pull out onto the road and drive for a few minutes when I see, you guessed it, the bus station. A very official, legitimate looking bus station with actual buses, which was probably about half a mile from the train. I have no doubts that this is where we were supposed to go, and I feel the blood drain from my face. I thought about jumping out of the van and running, but in a split second, I questioned if it wasn't for official tour groups or anything else I may not be considering, and my worst fear is ending up back at the first place without our new local friend. As we drive, I'm looking for street signs, landmarks, or anything to indicate we are actually headed to Cusco. All I see are wide open desert plains and nothing else. I I sat the rest of the drive frozen in fear, collecting a pile of makeshift weapons from what I could find in the back of the van. This included a sharp piece of car, likely from some previous collision, and a smallish fire extinguisher. I told myself if anybody tried to hurt us, I would kill them first and then figure out how to avoid a Peruvian in prison second. I spent the entire car ride telling myself that I had it in me to kill a person if they tried to harm me. I gripped my weapons until my knuckles turned white, when suddenly the van came to a stop, very much in the middle of nowhere. The driver accepts a phone call, which I can't understand. He then gets off the phone and slowly tells us he just remembered he can't take us all the way to Cusco. The native girl looks concerned, which makes me even more paranoid, and he proceeds to point to a large but desolate building and tell us to go in there to find a ride the rest of the way. Looking back, I'm not sure how I avoided throwing up from anxiety and fear. The three of us journey in there, my weapons abandoned as I couldn't sneak them out of the van, and people just kept pointing us further and further back until we come to a back opening leading us outside. I wanted to run, to somehow undo this entire journey, but we really had no choice other than to stick with the native girl. We had no alternative methods of transportation. There's no civilization in sight, and honestly, I'm not even sure what part of the country we're in. All I know is we are 60 to 90 minutes away from wherever the train stopped, hopefully in the direction of Cusco. We get to another van, this time with the opposite problem. They're insisting we fit 10 plus people into a 7-seater van. They try and take my backpack, saying it needs to go on the roof. That backpack had my passport and every resource I would most certainly want in an emergency. I'm thinking they can take it over my dead body, which might very well be what's happening. Right as I see my roommate happily passing hers to the lady, I grab her arm angrily, ready to ask what on earth is wrong with her survival instincts, but my face must have said it all because she backs up and uncertainly tells the lady, "Never mind. She'll be keeping her bag with her." The lady looks aggravated and says they won't fit in the car with all the people, and I tell her we are happy to hold them as I climb in and demonstrate it in a way that will require her to force either me or the bag out. She relents and my roommate crawls in. We sit in the back with our backpacks towering on our laps in front of us, my roommate looking somewhat inconvenienced that I've made her do this. Honestly, maybe I was overreacting, but better that than underreacting. We drive for a long while, and finally we enter the borders of Cusco. On the one hand, I'm relieved because I now know exactly where we are, but on the other hand, the surrounding areas outside of the main square are extremely dangerous shanty towns, and we are the only foreigners with giant backpacks on the bus. No sooner am I thinking, well, at least we are close, when the bus driver turns and says he doesn't want to drive further and we can figure our own way from there. Even the native girl immediately goes on red alert and offers to pay more if he will take us to the city square. He declines, kicks us off the bus, and drives away. We are looking at all the people staring openly at us, and she asks in a scared voice if we will split a cab with her. We agree immediately. The problem is, in this part of the world, a cab is often the first car to drive up and assures you they will take you where you are going. Not very official. This is exactly what happens. A Corolla from, I'm sure, 1993 pulls up and tells us to hop in. Our friend looks very wary, but decides it's better than winging it out in the open. He drops us in the town square without incident, and at this point, the native girl looks like she's aged 5 years since we first crossed paths with her hours ago. I'm sure I looked even worse. She meekly says, "Well, I'm glad we got here safely." I can barely talk, so exhausted, and respond, "Me too, thanks," and we part ways. I had a few incidents on this trip that made me believe that no matter where you are, one traumatic experience makes wherever the last place you slept feel like home. Let me tell you, the hostel bed felt just like home. I work about a mile from my house in a pretty small town, 100k-ish, very spread out. I grew up in one of the largest cities in the state, so living here has been a bit of a culture shock. It's very easily accessible by walking, so I never drive. About half a year ago, I finished work around 1 a.m. Nobody is really out past 8 p.m. here. A huge shock coming from a big city, so the park I walked through was utterly deserted. I live in one of the safest countries in the world. Not America anymore, so it's easy just to forget about how vulnerable I still am as a small female. I honestly didn't feel uncomfortable at any point of my walk until I rounded the corner past some basketball courts nearby my house. I was still about 2 minutes away from home, and this stretch of my walk was completely dark. The moon was massive that night. While I had welcomed its light at the beginning of my journey, in the absence of streetlights, it actually made things look pretty eerie. I had walked this path hundreds of times, but tonight something felt off. I'm not a fearful person in any sense of the word, but I was really on edge suddenly. Then I saw it. A van in the parking lot next to the courts, with its side door open. I picked up my pace and kept an eye on it. There are usually cars in that parking lot. I live in a tourist town, and backpackers often stay in their vehicles to save money. I'd never seen one with its door hanging open like that in the middle of the night, though. I was so focused on the van that I missed the van walking out from the trees near the courts, till he was a mere 30 feet behind me. He was walking fast, and there was little doubt that he was heading straight towards me. I was at a loss for what my next action should be. Screaming wouldn't do much. I was still too far away from any residences. I usually carry a glass bottle of water with me for protection. We have very strict laws on weapons, but had left it at work that night. My phone was dead. Everything I knew better than to do, I'd done. And as stupid as I feel writing this, I hesitated running on the off chance that he didn't mean to act sketchy. I have moved past this mindset overall, but there is still this strong part of me that balks at the prospect of making somebody feel uncomfortable or embarrassed. I also hate showing men that I feel scared of them because, even if they hurt me, I'd rather not give them any satisfaction of seeing my fear. I also knew I couldn't outrun him. I also overthink literally everything. I saw a little dark blue darting across the library parking lot at the back of the courts. It didn't even register to me what it was. The whole situation was so surreal. The guy was behind me now, and, judging by his footsteps, he hadn't veered course. I quickened my pace, felt out my keys in my purse, and slipped them in between my fingers. I heard a slight jingling noise and everything suddenly made sense. The blur was Apollo, the large black cat that often walked me home on the stretch after the park. Tonight, he was doing that weird cat run, where they get really low to the ground with their ears back. I had an impression that he was angry, but he was moving too fast for me to see his face properly, as he rushed past me. I kept walking, but the heavy footsteps were retreating now. I didn't dare look back and kept moving forward quickly. Apollo was suddenly by my side, still staying low to the ground and stopping every few feet to look behind him and his. Then he would do that weird cat run to catch up with me. He walked the whole way home with me, as he had done so many times, but I'd never seen him act like that. As we neared my gate, he visibly relaxed and flopped on his back. I coaxed him inside the gate before giving him some massive hugs and head bumps. I stopped walking home by myself at night and still saw my sweet little cat friend often. Never saw him behave that way again, though. Apollo moved away 3 months ago. I still miss my little buddy and often think about how strange that night was. I wish I'd turned around to see him chase the guy off. I've heard so many stories about dogs protecting people, but rarely ever about cats. My own little girl would never do anything like what Apollo did. I want to start out by saying that nothing I'm about to describe is dramatic on its own. That's the whole point, and that's what makes it hard to explain to people. When I try to tell this story out loud, I watch people's faces, and I can see them waiting for the scary part. And I honestly have to tell them, every part was the scary part, I just didn't know it yet. My uncle passed away in the springtime 3 years ago and left me his property in his will. He and I had been close when I was young and drifted apart as adults the way people do. And when he died without a wife or kids, apparently I was the person he thought of. The property was about 4 acres of land in a very rural stretch of the state, a few hours from where I live. A small farmhouse, a detached storage barn, and a lot of overgrown grass and old fencing. The nearest town was about 12 minutes down a 2-lane road. The nearest neighbor was a working farm about half a mile up the same road, and I only knew they existed because I could sometimes see the roof of their silo over the tree line. I wasn't sure what to do with the property at first. Selling it felt wrong so soon after he died, and something about it appealed to me in a way I didn't fully understand at the time. I think I just wanted quiet. I've been going through a rough stretch personally, and the thought of spending a few weeks somewhere completely removed from everything felt right. So that summer, I took 3 weeks off work and drove out there alone. The farmhouse was in decent shape for its age. My uncle had kept it tidy, old but not falling apart. Wood floors, low ceilings, a kitchen with appliances that were dated but functional, 2 small bedrooms, and a bathroom with water pressure that was either great or terrible, depending on the time of day. I spent the first afternoon airing it out, wiping surfaces down and making up the bed in the larger of the 2 rooms. By evening, I had the place feeling livable, and I sat on the narrow porch with a drink and watched the sun go down over the field. It was genuinely one of the most peaceful things I'd experienced in years. The first week was almost entirely good. I settled into a slow routine. I'd wake up whenever I woke up, make coffee, walk the property, and come back and read or do nothing for hours. I drove into town a few times for groceries and gas. I poked around in the barn, which was mostly empty except for old equipment and shelving. I slept better than I had in months. The first thing I noticed, and I want to emphasize that I truly did not think anything of it at the time, was that the gate at the far end of the property kept coming open. It was a simple metal farm gate that latched with a hook and eye closure, sealing off the back portion of the land from the open field beyond it. I closed it and latched it on my first walk around the property. 2 days later, it was open. I closed it again. A day after that, opened again. I figured the latch was just worn and the wind was catching it. I found a length of old wire in the barn and wrapped it around the post a few extra times. The gate stayed closed after that. Problem solved. The second thing I noticed, maybe 4 or 5 days in, was that the barn door had been open one morning when I was fairly sure I'd closed it the night before. I couldn't be certain though. I hadn't been paying close attention. Closed it, latched it, and again didn't think much of it. There was also a smell in the barn that I noticed on my second full walk through. Faint and animalistic, kind of. The kind of smell that old farm structures tend to carry anyway. I figured something had gotten in there at some point. Possum, maybe, or a groundhog. I looked around and didn't find anything, and figured whatever it was had moved on. Somewhere around the middle of the second week, I started sleeping lighter. Not because of anything specific. I just stopped sleeping as deeply as I had been. I'd wake up once or twice in the night, lie there for a few minutes, and drift back off. Nothing alarming. I wrote it off as my body adjusting to the sounds of a new place. Old farmhouses make noises, you know. Fields make noise. It's not the same soundtrack as a city apartment yet. I figured my brain was still learning to filter it. One night I woke up at some point and lay there in the dark, doing that half-awake thing where your brain is running but your body hadn't caught up yet. And I heard something outside. Distant and quiet, somewhere out past the porch. It lasted only a few seconds and then stopped. And my best description of it was footsteps on dry grass. Slow and unhurried. I lay there listening and didn't hear it again. I fell back asleep within a few minutes. And by morning, I wasn't even sure I'd actually heard it or just dreamed it on the edge of sleep. What I didn't connect it to at the time was that the barn door was unlatched again when I went out the next morning. I latched it once again and moved on. About 2 days later, I went to town for groceries and stopped at the small diner on the main street for lunch. I'd been in a couple of times, and the woman who ran the counter had gotten friendly with me and knew I was staying at my uncle's property. Her name was Patrice. While I was eating, she asked how everything was going out there, and I told her it was good, quiet, and exactly what I needed. I mentioned my uncle by name, kind of offhandedly, and she nodded and said she remembered him and said he used to come in on Sundays. Then she said something that I filed away without really examining. She said, almost as an aside, that she was glad the property had someone on it again, that it had been sitting empty for a while and that an empty property out that way tends to attract attention. I asked her what she meant by that. She kind of half shrugged and said that people out here just know which properties are vacant and which aren't, and that vacant land sometimes gets used without permission. Hunting, she said. Camping. People passing through. She said it in a totally matter-of-fact way, like this was just a known and ordinary thing, and moved on to refilling my coffee. I didn't press on it. I filed it away and drove back to the farmhouse. Looking back, that conversation was the moment I should have started paying closer attention. But I didn't. The last 3 days of my trip are where everything I'd been half noticing started to reframe itself. Though even then it happened slowly enough that I didn't fully understand what I was looking at until I was almost home. On the second to last day, I went through the barn more carefully than I had before. Not because I was suspicious, but because I decided I wanted to inventory what was actually in there and figure out if anything was worth keeping. I went through every shelf, every corner, looked in the old grain bins, and moved some of the larger pieces of equipment from the walls. Behind a very large shelving unit in the back corner, I found a folded blanket. Not ancient, not dusty the way everything else was in the barn. Relatively clean. I stood there holding it for a moment. I told myself my uncle had probably left it there. Maybe used the barn for something at some point and draped a blanket over something, and it slid down behind the shelf. I sat on top of the shelf and kept moving. I also found tucked near the base of the wall behind where the blanket had been, 3 empty tin cans. Food cans. Labels all gone, clean enough that they'd been rinsed, stacked neatly. I stood there looking at them for longer than I stood looking at the blanket. Then I picked them up, carried everything inside, put it all in the trash bin, and went inside and made lunch and watched something on my laptop, and didn't let myself think about it too hard. That night I woke up again, and this time I heard it much more clearly. Footsteps on the porch. Not inside, but outside, on the wooden porch just beyond my bedroom window. 2 or 3 steps. I lay completely still in the dark. I didn't hear the door. I didn't hear anything else. After 5 or 10 minutes of absolute silence, I turned on every light on the ground floor and looked out every window. I could see the porch clearly from the kitchen window. Empty. The field beyond it was dark and still. I checked the barn. The door was open. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the kitchen with the lights on until it got light outside, and then I packed my things, locked up the farmhouse, and drove home a day early. It was the drive home, 3 hours alone with nothing to do but think, where I finally let myself lay every single thing out in sequence. The gate, the barn door, over and over. The smell in the blanket. The cans, the footsteps twice. Patrice said the property attracted attention when it was vacant. The fact that I had been there for nearly 3 weeks, and there was a folded blanket and rinsed food cans behind a shelving unit in my barn. Someone had to have been using that barn. I don't know for how long. Possibly just since I arrived. Possibly for far much longer. Possibly since my uncle got too sick to be out there regularly. I don't know if they knew I was in the farmhouse or thought it was empty. I don't know if the footsteps on the porch were curiosity or something else. I don't know what they wanted or whether they ever came close to coming inside. What I know is that I spent 3 weeks out there completely alone, sleeping lightly and waking to sounds I talked myself out of, closing a barn door over and over and deciding each time it was the wind, telling myself small things were nothing while somebody was apparently sleeping in my barn, 50 feet from where I lay in my dead uncle's bed. I've been back once since, in the daytime with 2 friends. I haven't stayed overnight. I'm not sure I will ever again. Back when I was 18, my best friend Ann and I used to go to this club quite frequently. Legal age to drink in my country is 18. It was a trendy place with cheap drinks and really good music. My dad never stopped me from going clubbing, but he always told me to not get drunk and to be aware of my surroundings. Always. My mom always told me to look out for Ann and for Ann to look out for me. Girls need to stick together. So it was an average ladies' night on Wednesday where girls enter for free and drinks are cheaper. Ann and I started drinking and get pretty buzzed but not drunk. Ann needed to go to the bathroom, so I followed her and waited outside. So the male and female bathrooms were right next to each other, and there was a sofa area in front so people can sit and wait. On the sofa there was a girl who was obviously very drunk, and she was in between 2 guys who were laughing, but it looked off. They were harassing her, which could have been mistaken for just 2 friends having a laugh at their female friend being drunk. They proceed to literally carry her out of the club. At this point, Ann comes out, and I motion to her that this girl looks like she's in danger. We both trail them, and the more I see them interact with her, the more I feel that they're just out to assault her. My friend and I go up to her and start saying, "Oh wow, Angela, there you are." We didn't know her actual name. We just wanted to get her out of that situation. The 2 guys were shocked and put her down. Ann asked them who they were, and they claimed they were trying to help her and bring her out of the club for some fresh air. I wanted to give them a piece of my mind, but somehow read Ann's mind and decided against it. We were 2 18-year-old girls, and they were 2 large 25-plus-year-old guys. We wanted to save that girl, but we didn't want to jeopardize our own safety either. So we pull her away and put arms around her shoulders and carry her out of the club ourselves. We're trying to ask her if she has ID on her or if she has friends at the club also. She was too drunk to answer. We finally got outside and saw a small group of guys and girls around this girl's age. They see us and run towards us and her. They were her friends. The girls in the group take her from me and Ann and start talking to her in their own language. The guys thank us profusely, and we explain that we found her inside. We later learned they were German tourists, and this was their first time in our country. It still haunts me to this day. What would have happened if we hadn't intervened and saved quote-unquote Angela? So remember, please be safe. Drink responsibly and always have a friend with you when you're out. And look out for other girls because we need each other. So about 12 years ago, I was 9 years old, and I was home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to go to my aunt's house to have lunch and wait for my mother there. We always did that because we were too young to stay home alone, according to my mom. Got up at 10:30 a.m. I took a shower, then my brother. After that, we were both in the bathroom brushing our teeth and finishing up with that when we heard somebody knocking on the door. Since every time someone knocked at our door, they turned out to be salesmen or Jehovah's Witnesses, we kind of waited for them to go away. After a couple of minutes, I went to see if they were still outside through the window and nobody was there. What a relief. We continued getting ready when we saw a shadow go by through the bathroom window, which was kind of like a small square made with that kind of glass that makes everything behind it really blurry. We waited and saw it in case it was just a bird flying by when a hand hit it, clear as day. We got scared. We didn't know what to do. My brother had his cell phone, so he immediately called the police. While it was ringing, we heard a loud bang at the door. Somebody was brute forcing it. I don't know if they were kicking it or ramming it, but it was one of the most frightening things I've ever heard. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door, so I did. It took 5 bangs so the perpetrator could finally bash open the door. Then the police answered. I remember the exact thing my brother said. He was whispering and his voice could barely be heard. Hello, there is someone in our house. I think they're stealing. Then a pause. We're at, insert our address here. Another pause. I'm with my little brother locked in our bathroom. Please hurry. While all that, I was sitting against the wall, hugging my knees. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences ever. I could hear the man going through all of our stuff, emptying stands, going up and down the stairs, and opening cabinets. He even broke a few cups and plates. Don't know why. Then I heard the sound my cell phone makes when it turns off, and I remembered leaving it on the kitchen table. I felt so stupid for leaving it there. Things continued for a couple of minutes when we heard him trying to open the door of the bathroom. My brother got a hold of a big metal rod we had lying around there. He started kicking at the door. Who's there? The man screamed. We said nothing. And another kick. Then another. I felt like I was about to have an anxiety attack. My chest started to ache and I had chills. I was also really hot. I tried to remain calm, but it was just too much. After that, he finally stopped. We heard the door opening and then more silence. We waited for almost 10 minutes before going out of the bathroom. The living room was a total mess with lots of papers and books on the floor. The cabinets were open, cups and plates on the floor. And our mother's bedroom had been gone through as well. The nightstand and closet were open and everything inside them was all over the place. Upstairs in our room, it was the same thing. About 5 minutes, the man was able to go through everything we had and left a total mess. After that, my brother called my mom and she ordered us to go to my aunt's ASAP. So we did. When we got there, I was a little bit more relaxed. My aunt was waiting for us with ice cream, probably because my mother told her everything and she wanted to calm us down a bit. We went back home at about 5 p.m. My mom told her boss she had a home emergency, so she left early. She tidied up the house, cleaned up, and left everything the way it was before so we could be relaxed. I really appreciated her effort and my aunt's to calm us down and do everything so we didn't have to think about it. According to my mom, the police got home after she arrived. About 4 hours after the incident, she explained everything, but because of the lack of evidence, nothing could be done. The man was never caught, and honestly, I don't think they even tried to search for him. The next day, my mom was home with us. Now I tell this story as a funny anecdote. Luckily, nobody was hurt, and he only took useless stuff, but at the time, I was really scared. To a 9-year-old, an experience like that can have serious repercussions. I'm lucky it never came to that, and I got over that after a couple of weeks. So, yeah, that's my story. Way back in 1991, I was in my second year of high school. I volunteered to assist students who had special needs back then. I read textbooks aloud and recorded the audio for students with visual impairments and acted as a sign language interpreter for a deaf classmate and helped out with 2 classes for students with cognitive impairments. It was through this volunteer work that I met T. T had quite severe cerebral palsy, used a power wheelchair, and was visually impaired. I began as a textbook reader for her. It soon became quite obvious that she didn't really have any friends, as most of the kids who were not disabled really avoided those kids who were. There was a lot of bullying of the students with disabilities. Soon, I began accompanying T to her classes in order to help her avoid jerks, especially when it became known that she kept some of the morphine pills she needed for severe chronic pain in the bag on the back of her wheelchair. Guys began trying to steal those pills, even resorting to violence. Because T was nearly blind, she couldn't identify the jerks who attacked her. If If I were with her, they didn't try though. I felt horrible for her. She was very isolated as her family lived a long way outside of town and the local mobility bus would not go that far. All weekends and all holidays, she was stuck at home while the rest of us got to hang out with friends, so I started being a friend. Gave her my phone number so at least she'd have somebody to talk to on the weekends. Over the next couple of years, that became kind of an unequal friendship. She was a taker. If I had plans with other friends, she would moan about how she had no one else and how depressed she was. It was really strange just how she always seemed to know when I had plans with others. If I wanted to go out with them, she'd know and call me and guilt me into dropping them to stay on the phone with her. I mean, she always knew and I could never figure out how. Being the naive, socially inept kid I was, I'm autistic and social stuff is especially difficult for me. I fell for this manipulation. I'd get guilted out and cancel my plans with my real friends so I could stay on the phone with her. I didn't even like talking on the phone. My other friends and my mother did try to warn me that the way she was acting, dominating my time and manipulating me, was very unhealthy and not the way a real friend acted. But I felt like I had to defend her to them, as she had nobody else. Found her exhausting and I was having mental health struggles of my own, but I kept quiet and never spoke about my increasing anxiety. I didn't want to be mistaken for being anything like T, who brought up her abuse. I really started to think that she was making all this stuff up as the details changed with every telling. Depression and mental illness stuff. Whenever she wasn't getting what she wanted, so I didn't tell anyone how desperate and depressed I felt, and I hid my thoughts and feelings. Looking back on it, I really did need some help, but I kept it a secret. Partway through my 4th year of high school and her 3rd, she moved into a local supported living home for people who had disabilities, who needed help with things like dressing, bathing, meal prep, etc. Now that she was living right in my own town, there was no escape. I couldn't do anything with anyone without her finding out about it and guilting me over it. "You don't care about me, just like everyone else," she said. "I just want to kill you. Nobody wants me around, so screw it." Things like that. Eventually, if she called the house phone, no mobile phones back then, think fate, or I'd have no freedom from her at all. My parents would always say I wasn't home, even if I was. They gave excuses like me being at my piano lessons or my figure skating lessons or at my job at a local diner. If T got my mother on the phone, she would try to do Mom what she was doing to me. Thankfully, my mom was far better at setting boundaries than her daughter was and would only talk with T for a few minutes before giving a polite excuse and hanging up. Finally, I graduated. I chose a university that was a good 3-hour drive away from home, in part to avoid T. She would not be able to get to my new city. My room was in a building that was not wheelchair accessible, and there would be long-distance phone charges. With me away from home and inaccessible, T went after my mother's attention with an unnerving curiosity, calling multiple times every evening. That was the reason my parents finally got ID caller and voicemail, just so they could avoid answering the phone when she called. Years went by and I came back home after university. I began working for the local hospital. Facebook arrived on the scene and I joined up to keep in contact with friends and family who were now living all over the country. I hadn't thought of T in years. Then she sent a friend request, and I felt exactly like I did when I was in high school. Hounded. Needless to say, I blocked her. Eventually, I canceled my Facebook account entirely as she began making fake profiles to attempt to contact me. Thankfully, it has been about 10 years since she last attempted to contact me, and I have made that difficult. Neither my mother nor I am listed in the local phone book. I don't use my real name anywhere online, and I am very cautious about giving my mobile number to others. I don't know where she is, but I do hope she changed her ways and finally has friends she doesn't have to manipulate into hanging out with her. I've hiked most of my adult life. Not competitively, not obsessively, just consistently. Weekends, long weekends, and the occasional week-long trip where I could manage the time off. I'd done stretches of the Appalachian Trail before this, sections in Virginia, a few days in the Smokies, and a long weekend in Vermont that remains one of the best trips I've ever taken. I knew the trail. I knew how to read weather, how to manage my pack weight, and how to pace myself over long mileage days. I'm telling you this because I want to be clear that what made everything so unsettling wasn't that I was inexperienced or unprepared or out of my element at all. I was completely in my element. That's what made it so hard to dismiss. This was late September, 2.5 years ago. I took 10 days off work and planned to cover roughly a 130-mile section in Pennsylvania, southbound, starting just below the Delaware Water Gap. Pennsylvania has a reputation among through hikers for being punishing, not because of elevation but because of the rocks. Miles and miles of jagged ankle-breaking rock fields that slow you down and destroy your feet no matter how good your boots are. I'd done a short stretch of Pennsylvania years before and remembered it well. I went into it with realistic expectations and solid footwear, and a route I'd spent several weeks planning. The first 2 days were exactly what I wanted. Cool air, good color in the trees, and light crowds because the peak summer hiking season was over. I covered decent mileage both days, maybe 22 miles combined, which was solid given the terrain. I stayed at a shelter the first night, a lean-to-style structure shared with a retired couple from Ohio doing a section hike of their own, and we had a good conversation over dinner and turned in early. The second night, I tented about a mile past the shelter because the shelter had filled up by the time I arrived, and I preferred the solitude anyway. I slept well both nights. Everything was good. Day 3 is where I want to start because that's where I first noticed something I didn't like. I'd been hiking since early morning and had stopped at a water source around midday to filter and refill. It was a rocky stream crossing, fairly wide, and I sat on a flat boulder and ate lunch while my filter did its work. The trail behind me was empty as far as I could see in either direction, which was typical for a Tuesday in late September. I'd passed a few people going northbound earlier in the morning, but hadn't seen another southbound hiker since the previous afternoon. While I was sitting there eating, I had the feeling of being watched. I know how that sounds, and I want to be careful about it because that feeling in the woods can be easily your brain pattern matching shadows and rustling leaves into something intentional. I've had the feeling before, and it was always nothing. But I sat with it for a few minutes, and it didn't go away, and it usually does. I looked at the tree line on both banks. Nothing moved. I finished eating, packed up, and moved on, and within 10 minutes I'd mostly forgotten about it. That evening, I reached a shelter and decided to stay. One other hiker was already there, a younger guy named Peter who was section hiking northbound. We talked for a while, trail conditions, water sources, the usual exchange of information hikers do. At some point, I mentioned I had a strange feeling at the stream crossing earlier, that sense of being observed. Peter laughed a little and said he had a similar feeling that morning, a few miles south of where I'd stopped. He said he'd written it off, but that it stuck with him. We both agreed it was probably deer or some combination of woods brain and too much quiet and left it at that. I didn't think about it again until the following afternoon. Day 4, mid-afternoon, I was on a long exposed ridgeline section with good visibility in both directions. I happened to stop and turn around to take in the view behind me, and that's when I saw somebody on the trail about a quarter-mile back. Not unusual. A hiker moving in my direction at roughly my pace. I watched for a few seconds. They didn't look up or acknowledge me, and I turned around and kept going. About an hour later, I stopped at a viewpoint where a few large rocks made a natural sitting area. I took off my pack and rested for maybe 15 minutes. At no point during that rest did the hiker I'd seen behind me reach me or pass. I wasn't concerned. There were plenty of places to stop along that stretch, or it could have simply been moving slower than I'd estimated. But when I shouldered my pack and started walking again, I looked back one more time out of habit. The same figure was there, same approximate distance behind me, a quarter mile, maybe slightly less. I told myself they had probably also stopped to rest somewhere along the ridge. I kept going. That night I camped alone, off trail in a flat spot I found about 100 yards from the main path. This is something I did fairly often. I preferred dispersed camping to crowded shelters when the weather allowed, and Pennsylvania had been cooperative. I set up quietly, cooked and ate, and I was in my tent by dark. I slept fine and woke up to a clear cold morning. When I packed up and made my way back to the main trail, I noticed boot prints in the soft dirt at the edge of the path, near where I'd cut off into the woods. This meant nothing on its own. It was a public trail. Dozens of people could have passed that spot. What slowed me down briefly was that the prints appeared to stop near the junction rather than continue in either direction. The dirt was soft enough that the trail was well printed in both directions, and the clearest fresh prints I could see were clustered right at the spot where I'd left the trail the evening before. I looked at them for maybe 30 seconds, then kept moving. I want to pause and acknowledge that individually, none of this is a story, a feeling at a stream crossing, a hiker at a consistent distance, some boot prints near a campsite junction. Any single one of these things is nothing. I know this. That's exactly the position I was in at the time, constantly aware that I was working with fragments that didn't individually justify concern. What I can tell you is that something in my gut was beginning to accumulate all of those fragments, even as my rational mind was dismissing each one. My pace picked up on day 5. I told myself it was good, trail conditions. Day 5, I made it to a small trail town. Just a brief road walk off the Appalachian Trail to a cluster of buildings with a diner, a hostel, and a small outfitter. I went to the diner, ate an enormous breakfast, and charged my phone. The woman working the counter asked how conditions were, and we talked for a bit. I asked casually whether there had been any reports of anything unusual in that section lately. She gave me a look like she was deciding how to answer. Then she said they had a few reports over the past couple of seasons of a man following solo hikers. Nothing violent, nothing aggressive, just following. Staying back, people noticed him, and he'd back off or disappear, but multiple people had reported the same thing to the point where it wasn't just coincidence. She said the rangers knew about it, but had never been able to actually identify or locate the person because by the time anyone reported it, he was always gone. I considered cutting my trip short. I sat in that diner for almost an hour, turning it over. I was 5 days in, had good conditions, was making solid mileage, and had vested significant planning into this section. I also hadn't seen anything definitely threatening. Just a feeling. A hiker on a ridge. Boot prints. Against that, a secondhand report from a diner counter about something that might or might not be the same person, might or might not be relevant to me. I decided to keep going and pay closer attention. I also did something I don't normally do, which was to tell someone exactly where I was and what my planned itinerary was for the next 5 days. I called my brother from the diner and gave him the full breakdown. Campsites, shelters, road crossings, and expected mileage each day. Told him to call rangers if he didn't hear from me by a specific time each evening. I got back on the trail in the early afternoon. For the next day and a half, I noticed nothing. No feelings of being watched, no figure on the ridge behind me, nothing that seemed off. I started to relax incrementally. Good mileage, good weather, and the trail doing what the trail does best, which is filling your head so completely with the physical present that everything else recedes. By the morning of day 7, I was in a genuinely good headspace. On day 7 afternoon, I stopped at a shelter for water and to look at the map for the next stretch. A northbound hiker was there taking a break. A woman named Claire who was about 2 weeks into a through hike attempt. We talked for a bit. At some point she mentioned that she had a strange experience that morning. A man had camped very close to her site, close enough that she'd noticed but not said anything. And when she woke up, he was gone but had left a small pile of gear near the fire ring. Not valuable gear, a cheap rain poncho still in its packaging, an energy bar, a folded piece of paper with nothing written on it. She said it had been strange enough that she'd mentioned it to a southbound hiker who'd passed her about an hour after, and he told her to report it at the next trail town. She didn't seem particularly scared, but more puzzled. I didn't tell her what the woman at the diner had told me. I didn't want to frighten her more than necessary. I did tell her she should report it regardless, and she said she planned to. After she headed north and I headed south, I thought about what she described for the rest of the afternoon. Gear left behind, a rain poncho and packaging, an energy bar, blank piece of paper. None of it made sense in any direction I turned it. If it was the same person who'd been following me, then he'd been at her campsite that morning, which was behind me and north, and I hadn't seen or felt anything. Either he'd moved north, or there were 2 people behaving oddly, or everything was completely unrelated. Nothing happened that evening. Nothing happened the following morning. Day 8, late afternoon, maybe an hour before I was planning to stop him at camp, I was in a wooded descent, relatively slow going, focused on my footing. I stopped to adjust my bootlace at a flat rocky section, and when I stood up and turned back to look up the trail the way you do when you've stopped, there was a man about 40 feet behind me. He was standing completely still in the middle of the trail, not hiking, not looking at a map or adjusting his pack or doing any of the things you do when you stop on a trail, just standing and looking at me. He was a large man, heavy set, wearing dark clothing that wasn't quite right for the conditions, too heavy for the temperature, no trekking poles. He had a pack, but it was small, the kind of day pack that would be insufficient for overnight hiking. He had a beard and his face was weathered in the way of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. He was maybe 50 or 60 feet from me now, close enough that the eye contact was unmistakable, and he held it without any kind of acknowledgement or greeting. I turned and kept walking. My pace was not casual. I didn't hear him behind me. I don't mean his footsteps faded, I mean I heard nothing, which on a rocky trail is almost more unsettling than footsteps would have been. I resisted looking back for about 2 minutes, and then I did. Of course he wasn't there. I covered the next 4 miles faster than anything I'd done all trip. found a shelter that had 2 other hikers in it, and didn't leave until morning. I told the other hikers a vague version of what I'd seen, a man on the trail who had been acting strangely. They listened, and we all stayed close to the shelter that evening. I finished the last 2 days without seeing him again. I never heard footsteps behind me that I couldn't account for. I crossed my final road crossing on schedule, and my brother picked me up exactly where I told him. When I got home, I filed a report with the Trail Association. The ranger I spoke to on the phone took the information and told me they had similar reports from that section, that it was an ongoing issue, and that I wasn't the first to describe the same man. He thanked me for calling it in. He did not tell me they had any idea who the man was. He did not tell me they were close to resolving it. He just told me to feel free to call back if I remember anything else. I've hiked since then. I still go out, but I've never gone back to that section of Pennsylvania, and I don't think I will. It's not just the man, though he was frightening enough standing there in total silence 40 feet behind me. It's the whole shape of it, the way it built over 8 days without ever becoming something I could point to definitively. He never threatened me, never spoke to me, never came close enough to constitute a clear danger. He was just always there, at the edge of what I could prove, until the one moment he wasn't. This took place when I-26 female was about 16. My aunt was in town visiting, and we were coming back from the grocery store. We were driving back to my mom's house. My parents are divorced, and she lived way out in the country. Like, it's a 10-minute drive from anywhere. We pull up our driveway, and a red car pulls in behind us. My aunt and I stay in the car, and the man approaches the driver's side door. I can't rightly tell you why he looked like a creep, but he looked like a creep. Very pasty skin, eyes that were staring too hard, and just overall weird. He claims he is lost and looking for his way to a fitness center in the town next over. The exact fitness center that is about a minute away from where the grocery store is. Literally the opposite direction of where we just came from. Super odd, but I give him directions. He thanks me, but continues to stare at me. He asks me if we know each other, and I replied no. He gives me his name, and I again repeat, no, I do not. A couple seconds of awkward staring, and he asks me what my name is. Well, being an idiot and somewhat feeling anxious, I tell him. That was a mistake. He confirms we don't know each other. Oh, really? And heads back to his car, and we watch him leave. My aunt and I agree he was very strange, but shake it off and take the groceries in. From where we parked, you have to take a little windy path up behind the house to the back door. My aunt goes outside to grab the rest of the groceries, and I settle on the couch in the living room and look outside. The red car is in the driveway. My aunt came upstairs and said the guy was almost to our door and claimed he forgot the directions. My aunt clearly told him, right, left, right, and told him to leave. The directions were truly that simple when following the main roads. I'm freaked. She's freaked, but we've never seen him again. A month passes and I'm chilling at my dad's and post something like, I'm bored at my dad's house. Who wants to chill? On Facebook. Guys, please always set your page to private. Several minutes later, I get a message from the guy asking if I want him to come over. I'm home alone and understandably terrified. I immediately block him and tell my dad, who goes to one of his cop friends to see if they know anything about him. Well, this man was kicked out of a local university for stalking, and had 2 other accounts for stalking on top of that, and a restraining order. Another month goes by, and I'm in study hall with a friend, and he is telling me about this guy who was stalking his older sister. I don't remember the specific details, but it was definitely the story of someone being stalked. The craziest part was this stalker almost drove this girl's brother off the road in an attempt to get him to pull over. Once pulled over, the stalker jumped out and was making his way to my friend's vehicle, when my friend noped right out of there. I'm sure you guessed it, but the stalker and the creep I ran into were the same person. This story is 100% true. If you don't believe me, you can Google Corstorphine Hill murder. I grew up living with my mother and sister. Fairly normal childhood, living in a small town in the UK. I never knew my dad. All I knew from what my mother told me was that he was a bad man. I first met him when I was around 10 years old. It was all confusing. I don't really remember everything, but I think they had started seeing each other again. They saw each other on and off for a few months, and then he would disappear. This carried on throughout my teens until I was about 15 years old. He started to get quite aggressive, and she refused to see him anymore. My mother never told me when I was younger, but he used to beat her to an inch of her life when she was pregnant with me. One afternoon, he came to the door. When my mom wouldn't let him in, he tried to break the door down, shouting he was going to burn down the house and kill us all. He didn't know I was there to witness all of it. I saw him at the front of the house with his hands to his neck, mimicking slitting our throats. The day he got arrested, my mom had a restraining order against him. That was the last time we had heard from him until 3 years ago. I got a postcard through the post with nothing but my name and phone number on it. I instantly recognized his messy handwriting. I thought it was odd after about 5 years of no contact getting a postcard from him. Obviously, I ignored it. In July 2013, my mother found the police at her door. It came with some news that was shocking, but also not at all. I'll start from the beginning here. My grandmother went to visit my father. She is often traveling around, and it wasn't unusual to not hear from her for some weeks, but when she hadn't been heard from in 3 months, the family began to worry. The last person who had seen or heard from her was my dad. This all happened around the time I received the postcard. Her going missing had coincided with the discovery of a body around a half-mile from where she was last seen. A relative identified her from a digital reconstruction of her skull, which bore a striking resemblance to her. My dad was the number one suspect at this point. He was arrested on suspicion on her murder and later charged. The police took statements, told us they found evidence they knew it was him. He denied all, of course. We were following the case, which was when the grisly details started coming out. They had an argument and he ended up killing, dismembering, and then burying her in a shallow grave. They said she may have been alive when he dismembered her. Strangely enough, his family were on his side and said he was innocent. He later claimed clean about the whole thing. He said he thought she was a reptile in human skin and he wanted to cut her open to see the reptile. He was being held in a secure psychiatric facility but is currently in prison. He has been assessed by multiple psychiatrists who said he has paranoid schizophrenia. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison for manslaughter, not murder. I find it absolutely appalling. He has served 3 years already, so he will be out in 6 years. Somebody who has killed his own mother in cold blood and has made death threats to his own daughter will be out of prison so soon, and it absolutely terrifies me what could possibly happen if he ever finds me or my family. I'm confused about the postcard he sent me around the time he killed her. I don't understand how the justice system could mess up so much and let a potentially dangerous person out of prison so soon. I'll start by mentioning that I'm a 30-something-year-old woman living in a country-ish area on the west coast of the USA. Smaller town, but not terribly small or completely isolated. There are long stretches of land in between some of the homes, though. One of those stretches has a rundown but okay deli that sells wine and other convenient store stuff. I'd been in there before during the day, and all around the people in there seemed really friendly. I'd never gotten a bad vibe off of any of them. Usually, I just got my bag of chips or whatever and left. The worst complaint I could possibly have was that some of them only spoke partial English, but that never really bothered me at all, or interfered with their job. That is, until I finally went there at nighttime. I was having a rough day, so I decided to grab a bottle of wine on my way home from work for the weekend. I took the stretch of road leading to the convenience store and remember thinking that I never noticed how creepy it was at night. If it were raining, it would have been right out of the movie Psycho, where Janet Leigh is pulling up to the hotel. Anyways, I get in there prepared to just grab my wine and get out, but it seemed like the man working at the store at the time had other ideas. When he heard me walk in, he came from the back and had the most intense and frightening, unwavering stare I'd ever seen in my life. I remember trying to physically act nonchalant in response and say something to the tune of, "Hi there." I don't remember him blinking once as he made his way to the register. This whole thing was so creepy, coupled with how quiet the store was and how dark it was outside. I can't remember what exact pleasantries I said after that, but nothing would break his unending gaze. He also wouldn't respond to anything I said. At one point he asked me if I spoke Spanish and I said no. At that point I assumed that it was just him being uncomfortable at not being able to speak English well and felt more at ease. I even felt bad for him, as I'm sure people can be jerks to people who don't speak great English sometimes. That calm didn't last long though. Almost immediately after that he followed up, speaking English very well, with, "You are so beautiful. Do you have a boyfriend?" This immediately threw me off a bit because I'm a chubby lady and was by no means made up, so I did the usual, "Oh, that's very nice. Thank you." After that, he started following up with questions that weren't necessarily frightening, but definitely put me on edge in the context. Stuff like, "Where do you live? You come by here often, and when will I see you again, beautiful?" I kept saying the usual, "Oh, that's too nice," kind of stuff just to get the heck out of there. After what seemed like an excruciating amount of time, made worse by the unending staring, I finally finished the transaction. I thought I made it home free until I noticed that he was following me outside. He left the inside of the store unattended, staring at me with the same creepy smile the entire time. I fumbled for my keys and tried to start my car and get the heck out of Dodge. The lighting of the front of the store on him against the dark night was enough to make me start freaking out. He just stood there, a couple feet from my car, watching me try to get it started. Didn't say a word, just stared for what felt like 5 or 6 minutes. I'm sure it was shorter, but it felt like longer. When I finally did back out of the driveway and onto the main road, I watched him in the rearview mirror. He stared the entire way up the road until I hit the first curve and he was out of sight.